"This is my daughter, Sydney. My father, Richard," announced, his voice carrying across the ballroom like a gavel strike. "She makes coffee for a living." He laughed, a sound designed to invite others to join in, and they did nervous chuckles from board members who depended on his approval. I stood there, holding a silver tray of champagne, wearing the black apron of the coffee shop located in the lobby of his building. "Maybe if you all tip her well," he added, pulling a crumpled bill from his pocket, "she'll finally be able to afford a personality." He tossed the $12 bill onto my tray. It landed next to a crystal flute, pathetic and green. The room erupted in polite laughter. My spine stiffened, but my face remained a mask of professional indifference. Public displays of emotion were bad for business. I simply bowed my head slightly, took the bill, and slid it into my apron pocket, right next to the key card that opened the penthouse office directly above us. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. I retreated to the kitchen, the laughter still echoing in my ears like static. Most people would have broken down. Most people would have run out the back door, tears streaming, humiliated beyond repair. But I wasn't most people. And I wasn't just a barista. I pulled out my phone, my thumb hovering over the Vanguard Capital app icon. It opened with a facial scan, revealing a dashboard of numbers that would have made every person in that ballroom choke on their caviar. And there it was, a notification at the top of the screen. Emergency Liquidity Loan Application. Summit Corp. Amount: $14.4 million. Status: pending approval. I stared at the screen. My father, Richard, the CEO of Summit Corp., the man who had just publicly mocked me for making coffee, was $14 million in debt, and he was asking my bank to save him. The irony wasn't lost on me. To them, I was the failure. The daughter who wasn't smart enough, ambitious enough, or ruthless enough to join the family business. I was the disappointment who chose a service job. In reality, I was the silent owner of the financial institution holding the deed to their entire existence. I didn't decline the loan. Not yet. That would be too easy, too quick. Instead, I tapped the button marked Flag for Executive Review. A small notification popped up. This application will now require mandatory in-person review by the chairman. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. My hands weren't shaking. My breathing was steady. Why had I agreed to serve drinks tonight? Why had I put on this apron and walked into the lion's den, knowing exactly how he would treat me? Because for 28 years, I had been trained to seek his validation. It was a trap, subtle and insidious. The trap of normalizing cruelty. When you grow up with a parent who measures love in quarterly returns, you learn to devalue yourself. You learn to believe that if you just serve well enough, if you just stay quiet enough, maybe this time they won't bite. But tonight, the bite had drawn blood. And for the first time, I realized I didn't have to just take it. I looked at my reflection in the stainless steel refrigerator door. The apron. The sensible shoes. The pulled-back hair. They saw a servant. I saw a spy. "Sydney," the catering manager barked from the doorway. "Table 4 needs more champagne. Move it." "I'm on my break," I said, my voice calm, flat. "Break? You don't get a break until the speeches are over. Get out there." I looked at him. Really looked at him. He was just another man used to ordering people around because he thought they had no power. "No," I said. He blinked. "Excuse me?" I said no. "I'm done for the night." I took off the apron, folded it neatly, and placed it on the counter. The $12 bill my father had thrown at me was still in the pocket. I took it out and smoothed the wrinkles. "You can't just leave," the manager sputtered. "Go ahead," I said, walking toward the service elevator. "Tell him Sydney went home." I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. As the doors closed, shutting out the noise of the gala, I didn't feel sad. I felt efficient. The elevator descended, but my mind was already ascending. Tomorrow morning, Richard wouldn't be dealing with his barista daughter. He would be dealing with the chairman, And the chairman had some very specific questions about his liquidity. The next morning, the coffee shop was buzzing with the usual 8 rush. The scent of roasted beans and steamed milk filled the air, a comforting routine I had lived for 3 years. But today, the routine felt like a costume. I stood behind the espresso machine, pulling shots with mechanical precision. My mind, however, was upstairs, analyzing the financial reports I downloaded the night before. The door chimed, and he walked in. Brandon, my half-brother. He didn't look like a vice president of finance. He looked like a frat boy who had stumbled into a suit. He was on his phone, pacing near the counter, his voice loud enough to cut through the ambient chatter. I don't know why it's flagged, Cynthia. It's a glitch. The bank system is ancient. Just tell Dad I'm handling it. He hung up and turned to me, snapping his fingers. Hey. Tall latte, extra foam. And actually try to get it right this time, Sid. I looked at him. He was 25, 3 years younger than me, and had never worked a real day in his life. He'd been handed the VP title as a graduation present. I, on the other hand, had built a venture capital firm from a $2,000 seed fund into a powerhouse. Coming right up, Brandon, I said, my voice neutral. He didn't even look at me. He was already dialing another number. Yeah, listen, he said into the phone, leaning against the counter. We need to move the assets from the shell company in Delaware before the audit. Just mark them as consulting fees. No one checks that stuff. My hand froze over the milk pitcher. Illegal. He wasn't just incompetent, he was actively committing fraud. He was talking about embezzlement in the middle of a crowded coffee shop because he assumed no one here mattered enough to understand. He assumed the girl in the apron didn't know what a shell company was. Are you listening to me? He snapped at the phone. Just cook the books like we did last quarter. Dad's too busy panicking about the loan to notice. The steam wand hissed, punctuating his ignorance. I finished his latte and set it on the counter. Here you go, I said. He grabbed it without a thank you, still talking. Yeah, I'm a genius. I know. Just get it done. He walked out, leaving a trail of arrogance and incriminating evidence in his wake. I watched him go. He thought he was the golden child, the heir apparent. He had no idea he had just handed the help the weapon that would end him. I took off my apron. For the second time in 12 hours, I was done serving. I walked to the back office, grabbed my bag, and changed into the tailored navy suit I kept for client meetings. I pulled my hair out of its practical bun, letting it fall loose. I applied a coat of red lipstick, bold, professional, dangerous. Then I walked out of the coffee shop, past the confused manager, and straight to the private elevator bank in the main lobby. I swiped my key card. The light turned green. As the elevator rose to the top floor, I pulled out my phone and dialed my executive assistant. Sarah, I said. Cancel my morning. And send a summons to Summit Corp. Who should I request? She asked. Richard and Brandon.
I understand.
Mandatory attendance. Tell them, the chairman of the board is conducting a personal audit of their loan application. Right away, ma'am. I hung up as the doors opened to the Vanguard Capital penthouse. The office was sleek, modern, and silent, a stark contrast to the noise below. My phone rang again. It was Richard. Sydney, he barked. Where are you? Cynthia is hosting a dinner tonight and the maid called in sick. I need you to come over and help set up. I walked to my desk, the massive mahogany surface gleaming under the skylight. I sat down in the leather chair that cost more than his car. I can't make it, Richard, I said. Excuse me? Since when do you have plans? You pour coffee. I have a board meeting, I said. He laughed, a harsh, barking sound. A board meeting? What are you deciding which muffin is the flavor of the day? Don't be ridiculous. Be there by 5. He hung up. I looked at the phone. Then at the $12 bill I had framed on my desk earlier that morning. It sat next to the DEID stamp. He thought he was summoning a servant. He didn't know he had just insulted his executioner. I opened the file on my computer labeled Summit Corp. Financials. I began to read. It wasn't just bad. It was catastrophic. Richard had leveraged everything: the company, his home, his reputation. He was projecting strength, hosting galas, and bullying his daughter because it was the only currency he had left. He was a king with no kingdom, ruling over a pile of debt. And Brandon? Brandon was the arsonist burning down what was left. The intercom buzzed. "Ma'am," Sarah said. "They're here. They're in conference room B." I stood up. I smoothed my suit jacket. I picked up the folder containing the notes I'd made from Brandon's coffee shop confession. It was time to go to work. Richard and Brandon arrived at Vanguard Capital 15 minutes early, which for them was an admission of terror. I watched them from the security feed in my office. Richard was wiping sweat from his forehead with a monogrammed handkerchief. Brandon was pacing, checking his reflection in the glass, trying to look like he belonged in a room where decisions cost millions. "Send them in," I told Sarah through the intercom. I stood up and walked to the window, my back to the door. Keeping my back turned was a calculated power move. I wanted them to see the view first. I wanted them to see the city they thought they owned, laid out beneath the feet of the person they thought served them coffee. The heavy oak doors opened. "Mr. Chairman?" Richard's voice was oily, eager. "Thank you for seeing us on such short notice. We appreciate your discretion." I didn't turn around. "Not yet. Sit down," I said. Silence. Then the sound of chairs scraping against the marble floor. They sat. "We understand there were some irregularities with the application," Brandon said, his voice trying for confidence and failing. "Just a clerical error, really. I can explain." "You can explain the consulting fees in Delaware?" I asked, still facing the window. Brandon choked. Excuse me? Or perhaps you'd like to explain why Summit Corp's liquidity is currently sitting at negative $3 million while your personal accounts show a sudden influx of cash." "Who are you?" Richard demanded, his voice rising. "I want to speak to the owner, now." I turned around. The look on Richard's face was worth every second of the last 3 years. It wasn't just shock, it was a cognitive short circuit. He looked at me, then looked past me, then looked back at me, his brain refusing to connect the dots. "Sydney?" he whispered. "Hello, Father." Brandon stood up, knocking his chair over. "What the hell are you doing here? Did you break in?" "Security." "Sit down, Brandon," I said, my voice cutting through his panic like a scalpel, "and stop shouting in my boardroom." "Your boardroom?" Richard laughed, a desperate, hysterical sound. "You make lattes, Sydney. You don't own boardrooms. Get out before I have you arrested." I walked to the head of the table and sat down. I opened the leather folder in front of me. "Sarah," I said into the intercom, "bring in the security team, please. Just in case our guests have trouble understanding the hierarchy." 2 large men in dark suits stepped into the room and stood by the door. Richard sank back into his chair, the color draining from his face until he looked like gray putty. "You," he stammered. "You own Vanguard?" "Silent partner," I corrected. "I prefer to keep my investments quiet. It helps me see who people really are." I slid the folder across the polished table. It stopped perfectly in front of Brandon. "Open it," I said. Brandon's hands shook as he opened the cover. Inside were the transcripts of his phone call from the coffee shop. The transfer logs. The undeniable proof of his embezzlement. "I'm not here to serve you coffee, Richard," I said, leaning forward. "I'm here to audit your fraud." Richard looked at the papers, then at his son. The betrayal in his eyes was almost tragic. If he hadn't spent a lifetime earning it. "You stole from me?" Richard whispered to Brandon. "I gave you everything." "You gave me a sinking ship!" Brandon yelled, cracking under the pressure. "The company was already dead. I just took what I deserved." "Enough," I said. They both looked at me. The barista, the daughter, the chairman. "Here is the situation," I said. "Summit Corp is insolvent. Your VP is an embezzler. And you, Richard, are personally liable for $12 million in loans you can't pay." "Sydney, please," Richard said, his voice trembling. "We're family. You can't let this happen." You have to help us. Help you? I asked. Like you helped me last night? When you threw $12 at me and told your friends I couldn't afford a personality? He flinched. I can approve the loan, I said. I can save the company from bankruptcy. I can keep Brandon out of federal prison. Hope flared in Richard's eyes. Thank you. I knew you were a good girl. I knew. But, I interrupted, there are conditions. I pulled a second document from my portfolio. It was a transfer of ownership agreement. You will sign over 100% of your equity in Summit Corp to Vanguard Capital. Effective immediately. What? Richard stood up again. You want my company? You want to steal my company? It's not your company anymore, Richard, I said. It's the bank's, and I am the bank. I won't sign, he spat. I'll fight you. I'll sue you. Go ahead, I said. But before you call your lawyers, you should probably know one more thing. I paused, letting the silence stretch until it was almost unbearable. I didn't just buy your debt, Richard. 2 weeks ago, Vanguard Capital acquired the deed to this building, and the one next door, and the warehouse district where Summit Corp stores its inventory. I smiled, cold and sharp. I'm not just your lender, I'm your landlord. And rent is due. Richard sank into his chair, the fight draining out of him like air from a punctured tire. He looked small in the massive leather seat, surrounded by the opulence he had spent a lifetime chasing but never truly owned. You own the building? He whispered. I own the block, I corrected. Brandon was still standing, but he looked like he might pass out. Wait, if you own the building, does that mean? It means your office lease expired yesterday, I said, and I chose not to renew it. Richard put his head in his hands. My God, we're homeless. We're finished. Not necessarily, I said. I'm offering you a lifeline, a buyout. I pushed the ownership transfer agreement toward him. You sign over the company, you retire. Effective immediately. Brandon resigns. Also effective immediately. And if I sign? Richard asked, looking up, desperation warring with pride. If you sign, Vanguard Capital injects $14 million into Summit Corp. We pay off the creditors. We stabilize the stock. We keep the doors open, and the employees paid. And us? Brandon asked. What do we get? You get to walk away, I said. You get to avoid a federal investigation for embezzlement. You get to keep your freedom. I looked at Richard. And you get a pension. It's modest, but it's enough to live on. Assuming you downsize the house and sell the boat. A pension? Richard scoffed, a flicker of his old arrogance returning. I built this company. I deserve more than a pension. You built a house of cards, I said. And I'm the only thing keeping the wind from blowing it down. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the crumpled $12 bill. I smoothed it out on the mahogany table, right next to the contract. You tipped me this last night, I said softly. You told your friends I couldn't afford a personality. Well, Richard, it turns out I can afford your entire life. I pushed the bill toward him. Consider this my investment in your retirement. Take it. It's the last check you'll ever receive from this company. Richard stared at the bill. His face went red, then pale. He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in years. He didn't see a barista. He didn't see a disappointment. He saw the person who had just beaten him at his own game. He picked up the pen. His hand shook, but he signed. Brandon signed next, tears of frustration leaking from his eyes. He knew his golden ticket had just been revoked. Done, I said, taking the papers. Sarah, please escort the former executives out of the building. The security guard stepped forward. Richard stood up, clutching the $12 bill in his hand like it was a lifeline. Sydney, he said, his voice cracking. I'm your father. I know, I said. They walked out, flanked by security. The heavy doors closed with a solid, final thud. I was alone in the boardroom. The silence wasn't empty. It was clean. It felt like the air after a storm. I walked to the window and looked down at the city. Somewhere down there, Summit Corp employees were working, unaware that their jobs had just been saved, unaware that the tyrant who had terrorized them was gone. I hadn't destroyed the company. I hadn't burned it to the ground for revenge. I had saved it. I had planted seeds of stability where Richard had sown chaos. That was the difference between us. He used power to belittle. I used it to build. My phone buzzed. A notification from the coffee shop manager downstairs. "Hey, Sid, you coming in tomorrow? We're short-staffed." I smiled. I typed back. "Sorry, Mike. I'm putting in my notice. Effective immediately." I put the phone down. Then I picked up the landline on the desk. "Sarah," I said. "Schedule a company-wide meeting for Summit Corp at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Tell them the new CEO will be addressing the staff." "Yes, ma'am." I hung up. I took a deep breath. The barista was gone. The chairman had arrived. Have you ever had to hide your success to protect someone else's ego? Tell me your story in the comments. And if you enjoyed this victory, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of justice.